name's Doug Rohde. I'm a prior service active duty infantry officer, and I left active duty in 2022. Had a 2-year break in service, and now I'm back in the Army National Guard in Nebraska as a part-time job, and then here as my full-time job teaching the freshman and sophomore cadets in the Army ROTC program.
Awesome. For those who kind of don't really know or understand, like, what do you do as an infantry officer? What is your job?
Yeah, so infantry officers are, they lead infantry soldiers, and infantry soldiers are the soldiers who are trained to close with and destroy the enemy.
Yeah.
So combat arms. As an infantry officer, I'm ensuring their health and welfare is taken care of, and that they receive the training that they need to so that they can do their jobs.
So when you're working like really closely with your troops and stuff, you weren't like above them, but you're like on the ground with them?
Yeah, for sure. So as a platoon leader, you're right there with your platoon, doing everything your platoon's doing, and then as a company commander or executive officer, you're helping oversee the multiple platoons in your company, and going through experiences with them, and making sure that they're being treated right and that you're giving them everything that they need as a leader. You know, I think above all else, you need to be a leader of character and empathy and be able to understand others and what others need. You need to be an expert at your profession. You need to care about knowing exactly how to do your job to the best of your ability and understanding what resources are available to you, and putting forth the effort required to be a good leader, because your soldiers don't always get to choose who their leaders are, right? So they're stuck with you either way. So you want to make sure you provide them with the best leadership possible.
Really, anything in general that made you realize or pushed you to show you like how you could be that good leader or develop that character that you wanted to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, some of my initial training right after college, you know, infantry officer training was physically and mentally challenging, and then culminated with Ranger School, which is a pretty tough physical and mental test. You learn a lot about yourself and what your limits are, and also what kind of leader you are when you're pushed to the limit. You know, when also you're leading people who are being pushed to their limits. So you're leading you're leading those who don't necessarily want to be led. Is a big challenge, and you can learn when everything's kind of stripped away and people are down to their bare selves, how to reach people or how to still get the job done.
What was that like for you, like going into that?
Yeah, so I mean, it was, you know, it's all about the preparation and making sure you're physically and mentally ready to start, and then it's just about not quitting after that. So you know, you're gonna lose a lot of sleep, lose a lot of nutrition, and you know, you will be tested to your breaking point. And it's just about keeping in mind the end state and what your goal is and what you're working toward, what you train for, and that at the end of the day, it's putting one foot in front of the other and continuing on until you're done. I also think, you know, having that experience in your past that you can call back to and say, well, at least it wasn't as hard as this, or I remember when it was, you know, really tough doing this, and this is similar to that, so I know I can go through it, that kind of thing. You have to meet people where they're at, right? So not everybody is going to show up to your unit, you know, at the same level. So everybody's going to come in the door with different strengths and weaknesses, and it's your job as a leader to recognize what those strengths and weaknesses are and find ways to bolster their weaknesses and help them and develop them, and then capitalize on their strengths and let them fly with those, right? So, I mean, I think about just like the FTX with the cadet. She's struggling on the rappel tower. A lot of people just got up there and had a great time and thought it was the most fun thing ever. But if you're afraid of heights, never done it before, you don't have confidence in your equipment, then that's going to be a struggle. And, you know, we helped her work through that and just tried to be there for her to explain that, hey, you know, look at everybody else who's gone before you. They've all done it. Everybody's safe. Everybody's checked your equipment. You are good. Like, you can let go right now, and we can still get you to the ground perfectly safe. So you got to trust us. And, you know, ultimately she succeeded. As a leader, you want to trust your soldiers and your people that they're going to do their jobs and that they're going to make the right decisions when you're not around, that are still working toward the same end state that you're all working toward. And at the same time, soldiers are trusting their leaders to give them the proper guidance and direction and training so that they can succeed, so that they know if they get tasked with something hard, they know that their leader is only tasking them with that because they know it's necessary and they know they've given them the tools that they need to succeed. When I think of like mental health in the military, specifically the Army, because that's my experience, right? Or what I've seen in my experience while on active duty and now out and then in the National Guard, and then I'm, you know, keeping in touch with old soldiers and people that I served with 10, 12, 13 years ago, right? The biggest struggle that I see is you take young people who come straight out of their homes or wherever after high school, and they get inserted into the world's most, tight-knit community you could possibly imagine. They're living together, they're training together, they're working together, they're going on exercises together, they're experiencing trauma and experiencing hardship together. And now you have this young person who's in this environment, and they're building the strongest bonds they've ever experienced in their entire life. And they're having a great time with they're making friends, they're doing all this, and they don't realize how strong of a support system they have while they're in the military, and the structure that they have. And they have this community, and it's all around them, and they're all wrapped up in it, and they don't even realize it, right? And then they break out and they leave the service. They go off in the civilian world. Rather quickly they find themselves without that same network anymore, and without the same support system, and without the same structure. Now they're out there alone, they don't have the same support system, they don't have the friends and the bonds that they built. They go down a dark path, and all of a sudden they're at a place where they don't think they have another option, and they do things like drug abuse, alcohol abuse, suicide. They have this sense of community, they leave the community and they don't know what to do, and they don't know how to build a new one or join a new one, or become ingrained in a new one, and they struggle because of it, and they underestimated it before they left the service. You have a small number that's due to combat stress or traumatic experiences while deployed, but the majority of what I saw was personal issues, right? And it compounded with drugs and alcohol, family issues that people thought they couldn't get out of, or having issues with their career. A lot of the times it wasn't the soldiers, NCOs, and officers who were the ones asking for help. It was always the strong ones who tried to say that they're okay. When I was a company commander, one of our best NCOs took his own life, and he was the last one anyone would have expected for that to happen. Saw the effect it had on the whole company, and it was a difficult experience for sure. Guys get so ingrained in the culture and being with with the boys, right? And then they think they're going to be fine, and they leave. All of a sudden they're alone, and they're like, what do I do now? They don't know how to build that community, and they go, I'm never going to experience that time on active duty, whatever. I'm never going to have that experience again. I'm never going to be able to replicate it. I'm never going to be able to go back. It's never going to be as good as that was. It takes personal ownership to find their own community, find something new that they can be a part of that gives them meaning and purpose. And purpose is huge for sure. I mean, that's why I'm back in the Army, right? I knew that I needed this in my life. But I think people need to find something that drives them, and that they can, a community they can be a part of. On us is to do a better job of just staying in touch with people, saying hi, checking up on people. Hey, how's it going? That really goes a long way. I've seen definitely a concerted effort with people I've served with to do that with me and with others, right? But I think if you're not a veteran, right, I think it's asking about their experience. They say like every veteran has a story. Everybody's got their own personal veteran story on what they did and how they came to be where they're currently at. And I think it's important for people to ask questions and just care about what they did, because a lot of people have experiences that you'd never guess. Even though we're not in like a period of active wartime, there's not a lot of deployments going on, not a lot of people are deploying. People are still having a lot of experiences in the military that are significant and gaining experiences that they'll have for the rest of their life. So just asking and listening, looking out for the strong ones too, I guess would be my thing. I don't know how to fix it.
The best you can kind of be is just be there for them, wouldn't you think? Yeah,
I think so. I think just like people that have, like, I remember my civilian job, working in manufacturing, and I would be talking to some of these guys, and I would be like, okay, I'm 15 to 20 years younger than a lot of you, and I feel old in the Army, but out of the Army I'm not old. And talking to some of these guys and relaying an ounce of the experience I had on active duty, even though I only deployed one time, like compared to some guys that's nothing. And I know if like you've experienced even an ounce, just a little bit of community, right? Like imagine that times 100. And I guess having the awareness that it's gonna come and that it's gonna happen. Because some people are like, I can't do this job anymore. I can't do the Army. My family can't take it. I don't like doing the infantry stuff, or whatever your job is. Then that's fine. A lot of my soldiers have gone out and been super successful. Like some went 4 years and went straight out into college. Engineers, lawyers, lots of successful professionals, and they have no problems. But
Yeah.
a lot of them find a community right away. Like I had 2 NCOs that went to University of Alabama, and they have a great veterans program, I guess, down there,
Mhm.
and like that was their community right away.
I mean, it sounds to me like community is the big thing.
I would say community and purpose, caring about what you're doing every day. That's why, like I said, that's why I'm back in the Army, because I ultimately realized that being an infantry officer is one of the things that drives me for
Yeah.
my purpose.
That's awesome that you're able to like find it and find a community and a place where you can belong.
Yeah. Because, you know, even as an officer, like you have 3 platoon leaders,
Yeah.
the XO, and the FSO. So
Yeah.
there's 4 or 5 lieutenants in the whole company, and that's it. And then the company commander. So that's the whole company. Has that many officers.
That's all the leadership.
Mm-hmm. Now you have this times 4 across the battalion, right? That's your 4 years, right?
Yeah.
And then you're a captain, and you go to captain's career course, come back, you're a company commander, and now it gets a little bit slimmer, right?
Yeah.
And they always say like, oh, that sucks, like you don't have any friends. And it's like, it couldn't be further from the truth. Officers are just like NCOs and privates, like
Yeah.
you all band together, you go through your like Army experience together. I literally am friends with Army officers on like social media. Sometimes I'll see a name and be like, oh yeah, I remember that guy. Even as an officer, your community is a smaller pool, but you still build such tight-knit relationships. The Army thought it had a combat stress problem, and then very quickly when the deployment stopped, they realized that something else is happening. And that's what they're trying to figure out still.
I mean, do you think like that needs to? Do you think it works? Do you think it's helping people out?
It's important to talk about it, yeah. It's hard because you don't know how many suicides were prevented. You know, there were multiple soldiers that I had in my command that were like, hey, you know, so-and-so expressed feelings of wanting to harm themselves, so we get them to the hospital, we get them to the care that they need, where professionals can give them the treatment that they need. Some of those people returned to duty and they were fine and went on, and it was a one-time thing. Other people have other mental health issues, and then once we got them on that path, they're able to, you know, successfully exit the military and go find something that worked with what they needed and with what their mental health state was. Army takes it really seriously. Like it's, I mean, there's these things called SIRs, like serious incident reports, and company commanders have to report different incidents depending on what it is, right? So if a soldier says, I'm thinking of killing myself, I have a gun at my house, and if you let me go home, I'm gonna do it.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, you know, whoa, all right, let's get you to the hospital. And they get them to the treatment that they need, right? That event, right? That's a platoon leader calling a company commander calling a battalion commander, battalion commander calling a brigade commander.
Yeah.
In some places, that's a division level notification. Like that's how serious the Army takes it. How the Army handles everything after that is the part that they're still working on.
What are some hardships faced by new troops coming into the Army, and also when adjusting back?
Yeah, I mean, like new soldiers, especially coming on to active duty, a lot of times it's the first time they've lived on their own, so you have to make sure that their leadership understands, like there's some teaching involved, how to pay your bills, how to do your laundry. Is crazy. Seriously, as crazy as that sounds, some soldiers will show up and their parents took care of everything for them. Like we said earlier, like meeting the soldiers where they're at, what they need, making sure that you're looking out for them, and adjusting to the Army life can be hard. So good leaders will see that and watch for signs that people aren't adjusting well. The Army does a pretty good job of taking new soldiers and just like, oh no, you're part of the team now. Like, come on in. Army's worked really hard to get rid of hazing. Obviously, you'll never fully get rid of everything, but you know that was really serious when I was a platoon leader. Once they're in, they're in. People get integrated pretty quick. You know, it only takes a month or two of a brand new soldier, and they're off and running. You know, I'd say coming home from deployments, the biggest thing is, again, like if we talked about, you know, hanging with the guys, right? In an office in like the garrison environment, when you're deployed, it is, hey, now us 4 live in a room this big. We're, again, experiencing hardship. We're all away from our families and loved ones, and now we're bonding through that, right? So it's, you know, even my deployment was relatively relaxed compared to others, and it still it still like built huge bonds with guys. And for me, walking back into my house now I'm living with a 2-year-old, and you know, she's got her own agenda. Readjusting to family life was hard, and kind of how I acted and how I spoke even. That's all an adjustment when you come back, and having the recognition to see that, watch for things that you're doing that you need to change to reintegrate yourself back into regular life is definitely something to keep an eye on. And a lot of this stuff I was able to do on my own, no problem.
Yeah.
But if there's something that I saw or my wife saw that I couldn't do, then I know that she would have said something to me, or I would have recognized it myself and I would have asked for help.
And there's a lot of wisdom, a lot of time, a lot of experience there, and
Sure.
I'm grateful. I'm grateful that you're
Sure.
willing to share that with us, because that's not only gonna help me, it's gonna help whoever hears that.
Sure.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Would you say a family support unit is important?
I know one of my friends who, when he was stationed at the 173rd in Italy, and when he redeployed from Afghanistan, somehow ended up kind of on his own redeploying, like coming back home. He told me, he's like, I just found myself after coming back home from Afghanistan in like a barracks room with a unit that wasn't his, so he didn't know anybody. After living through a different experience, and all of a sudden he's just like alone, and I think he had a little bit of an adjustment there, you know what I mean? But I think families can definitely help. It can also be a huge stressor when you come back right away, and you have to reintegrate the proper way and recognize that, okay, your life deployed was one way. You're about to go back to a whole different world where your hours in the day are spent doing different things, and you need to be ready to just like be flexible and switch back into that. After a couple weeks, you'll start feeling more comfortable doing that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What did you get out of being in the Army?
Yeah, I think other than the community like we talked about, I think the Army's taught me how to be resourceful, how to be comfortable being uncomfortable, how to adapt to any situation and work with anybody. Not, you don't have to be friends with them, you don't have to be brothers with them, but like be able to work with somebody you don't like, or you don't like the way that they do things, putting that aside and finding a way to work through it. Definitely like a lot of problem solving and just like basic leadership.
What can a family do to support a soldier that comes back from service?
I think families specifically can be patient with their veteran and their service member, right? Giving them space, not assuming that everything's okay, and then also just appreciating, well, that sounds wrong, but like just being appreciative of the, sometimes I think families can get bitter toward the service member when they have to spend time away.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing, like the service member's also away, and I know it's not the same, but there sometimes can be some animosity built up there. So I think just making sure that the family and the service member don't build up any kind of walls because of that, and you can talk about it and communicate is huge.
My name is Tom Slikas. I'm a Lieutenant Colonel in the United States Army. I've been on active duty for over 20 years. Most of my assignments have been stateside. I've deployed a few times for contingencies and combat operations. I served as an infantry officer, as an all-source intelligence officer, and now I serve as a strategic intelligence officer.
What place have you deployed to?
I've deployed to Iraq a couple times. Mainly like stability, security operations, not tons of active combat operations. A couple years later, I deployed for a year as an advisor to the Iraqi military. From mid-2008 to mid-2009, I was embedded with an Iraqi Army battalion and then a brigade to again try to let the host nation, the Iraqis, tackle their own challenges, but not without our support. So, but try to get them to run and secure their own nation.
Running a military operation, could you see any stress on your soldiers with yourself? Was there something, challenges you have faced? How did you overcome them?
Yeah, so there's the stress of the unknown. Early on, if you've never deployed, you're focused on maybe what you hear in the news. And the news doesn't necessarily portray all of the awesome things. The news kind of portrays casualties, seeing kind of faces of our fallen. I had a classmate that was killed in action. That's what's going on day in and day out. And sure, there are thousands of U.S. servicemen and women that were killed in these conflicts. But my experience wasn't death day in and day out. For stressors, absolute stressor. I was probably stressed more my second deployment because I was in a smaller unit operating more autonomously. I did not have a large amount of U.S. personnel that could quickly come to my aid should we have engaged in some large-scale combat. To counter the stress, I felt I was way better trained for my second deployment. My small element that I was a part of, we trained for multiple variables and more complex situations. So I felt we had really great cohesion, and we were a proficient force, so that helped overcome those stressors and build my confidence. Other stressors that I noticed personnel have while deployed, just being away from family, right? That's different. As years went on, we could communicate more frequently. Early deployments, you'd be lucky to get a phone call home. You're standing in line for hours for a few minute phone call with your loved ones to maybe let them know you're okay. Later on, as the U.S. footprint grew, we had more of those creature comforts that you'd expect to see in the United States. Wi-Fi access. You could have oftentimes more regular contact with your family, so that reduced the stress. But that was a noticeable hardship, the strain on families. Other hardships are not knowing how a situation is going to unfold. So seeing another unit get into contact and knowing that there are casualties there, question what would you do in that situation? How could you have done things different? Even in your own situations of coming into contact with the enemy, did we do things the right way? I think you're reassured if you have the tools. I think you can be reassured that you're doing the right things. Like, no, it was proper for us not to engage in that situation. Had we have engaged in that situation and gotten to some sort of firefight, we would have brought about more civilian casualties or something like that. So if you're equipped with those tools and that type of training, it kind of reduces the stress and uncertainty.
Do you think going into those combat situations, the idea of maybe, is this a civilian, is this a real enemy, or even, hey, I might die today, hey, my battle buddy has died, do you think those thoughts, those worries negatively impact a soldier's mental health, and how much do you think it impacts?
They absolutely impact mental health. Now it's what we do with that stressor, how we react to that stressor. If we know that we're doing the morally right thing, there was an adversary trying to shoot at us or hostile intention. They were getting ready to blow up a bomb on my patrol or attack the base that I was on. Soldiers do those things to prevent that from happening. They're morally justified in doing so. They're adhering to the rules of engagement, but it can still eat at folks when there's potential for a civilian casualty or there are civilian casualties, because we're not there to do more harm. We're there to protect people. And so that definitely can eat at soldiers. I've learned that in those situations, when things are justified, leaders need to reassure those who engaged in that act that they did the right thing morally. They had the rules of engagement. They did as they were trained. There was a bad situation going on, and the action they took contributed to saving another service member's life. So much of that, if we don't do that, that soldier is left uncertain. Did they do the right thing? And as you could imagine, that uncertainty can build, and that question of themselves can build over minutes in the immediate aftermath, hours, days, months, and maybe it can be suppressed, but it's never fully addressed. And then when there's more adversity, or that current soldier or former soldier experiences a sight, a smell, a situation that takes them back to that event, that can bring back that old feeling that had been buried and can bring about more stress and strain on their mental health.
Do you think it's possible that even if a soldier does not see combat, to still feel the same level of stress?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not narrow just to soldiers, right? If I see a bad car accident, right, and see trauma, I'm gonna will have some post-traumatic stress. The U.S. has experienced this and noted this with its remotely piloted aircraft, the controllers. So our drones, some are armed with weapons, some are just armed with some sort of surveillance device. Many times they're controlled away from the front line. So that pilot, the person controlling that aircraft, isn't in direct fire contact. They're probably not even in that country. But in controlling the optics or weapons, they see death. They see people getting wounded. And it can absolutely have an effect on them, but yet they're not in direct contact. Right, they're not a rifleman shooting at somebody. They're releasing a weapon from thousands of feet from the aircraft, and they're controlling the weapon from 50, 100, thousands of miles away. And they have that post-traumatic stress.
And you touched on a little bit beforehand, what as a leader and also as a battle buddy, what do you think could be done to help someone who is going through that experience?
Yeah, so I think as a leader, it's incumbent on you to build some of those leadership skills. So just adding more requirements for you to pick up. But some of these are quite fundamental to being a leader. And so some of those requirements are, I took a few notes, like you choose to listen. Right? Don't always be directed. So when you're interacting with soldiers, you know and you learn about your soldiers, so you can tell when something doesn't seem quite right. An effective approach can just be listening. Be empathetic. It's a little bit of a 180, right? We want to be excellent. We want to be lethal. We want to be the global force for good, but we also want to be understanding, appreciate somebody else's perspective, right? We're all different. We all have different values. So if we're empathetic, maybe we are more approachable, right? And that's another key, right? You can't expect somebody to trust you to be listened to if you're not approachable. So as a leader, you should be approachable. It's not about being somebody's best friend. You're not their best friend necessarily, but you are approachable. You prove that you're a human. You prove that you're somebody that has great intent. Your intent is to take care of people. As a soldier or as like a battle buddy, a friend, try to have a network, right? A network of people that you can rely on, both in the military, right? But if we're balanced, let's try to have that network outside of the military, friends in our community, because maybe we just need a break from military jargon, military speak to be well-rounded. And one of the last ones, it's challenging, right? But it's having the courage to ask for help. Again, we're the military, we're free of emotion, we want to be lethal, we want to be the world's global force for good, and we want to be so ready and so lethal that our adversaries take pause and say, today we're not going to mess with the United States, right? So we've got to be strong, we've got to be ready. And so part of that is not necessarily like, hey, I'm not doing so well, asking for help. And so if you can't ask for help, at least try to know some resources. So as a leader, you have to know about resources. Resources in your unit, a chaplain, a behavioral health, holistic health and fitness, all these methods that the Army has brought forward to try to help soldier readiness by getting them the care they need. If the trust in an organization is not there, there are many anonymous tools. Military OneSource, you can get access to medical care, and it's completely anonymous. Your unit doesn't know about it. And then of course, right, we have this text, right, this suicide prevention text, the 988. So if you're worried about perceptions, right, if you're my leader, I'm worried about showing a little chink in my armor, right? I'm not as tough as I'm portraying you. Maybe I perceive that you're going to judge me in a certain way. Try to have the courage to still trust your leader and go to them. But if you can't do that, find another tool. Try to find another resource. It can be challenging because our military is reflective of our society. So the general population of Americans kind of lack access to resources for behavioral health. It's not super prevalent to get counseling. There are barriers to that, such as cost, right? Not everything is free, but for military members, try to take advantage of those. And I think post-service, veteran community, they can feel a gap, like a lack of purpose. Like I was part of something. I was part of Team America. I was a servant to my nation, and now I'm separated or retired, and I don't feel that purpose. So they can try to overcome that purpose and find purpose and stay connected to their old battle buddies, people they serve with. But there are a lot of good organizations out there. If you like fitness, RWB, Team Red, White, and Blue, right? In nearly every community, former military members get together, and if you want to run, go run. If you want to walk, it's doing what you can, staying connected. And then we stay connected maybe around fitness, and that's a gateway to open up and talk to each other about what's the great things that are going on in our lives and the challenges that are going on in our lives. There are other organizations to be a part of. In this community, there's an organization called the 50 Mile March. They do a ruck march from the Capitol here in Lincoln to Omaha, right? And they do it to try to raise money and resources for veteran issues, right? So can find that purpose that way. Another way to find purpose is, right, serve honorably, right? So you don't have regrets. You know that you honorably served. And then when you're done serving, be a citizen that is worthy of somebody else's sacrifice. Having purpose can help. It won't get rid of like mental health challenges or PTS. I think it can help provide resiliency to help you overcome them. As a leader for suicide prevention, you get to be keenly aware of those triggers that are indicative that somebody may try to harm themselves, right? So we all have this thing, ACE, ask, care, escort. Be blunt. John, are you thinking of harming yourself? Yes, I have a plan. Oh, no, I don't. Like, I'm not harming myself. I was just giving my old speakers away because I got new speakers. right? Because giving away valuable items is an indicator, right? So somebody is attuned, they're a positively intrusive leader. I'm not trying to pry into your life, but I'm trying to know about you. And then know trends. So years ago, there was a study at what is now Fort Liberty, North Carolina, where they had a few soldier suicides. Like, whoa, what's going on? So they looked back at like 5 years worth of events, soldier suicides, and they found two kind of prevailing triggers. And those two triggers were a real or perceived setback at work. I didn't perform well, and my evaluation showed. I didn't perform well, and I actually got removed from a job, right? So I had this setback, and I believe either, and I let that take me places. Am I going to lose my job? Am I going to lose my sense of purpose? I'm a soldier in the Army. So that was one key indicator. The other key indicator was a significant relationship change. So with either a significant other, a girlfriend, boyfriend, or husband or wife, right? Those were kind of the two prevailing indicators. And I just became aware of this in like 2020, right? I heard about this. And I think back to when I had soldiers try to take their lives. And in one case in 2006, I had a new soldier come in and I got a phone call, he tried to take his life. And I learned about these triggers years later, and yet another trigger is a new assignment, right? That uncertainty of trying to fit in, and this soldier was fairly new to my organization. A few years later, I had another soldier, she tried to take her own life because she had a kind of a contributing factor where she had a setback at work. She didn't serve honorably, and she's going to be held accountable. And she already had a track record of yet another indicator, which is significant drug and alcohol abuse. That previous abuse, this real or perceived setback, she's going to get counseled, right? She was going to lose her job, but it was perceived that she had this setback and she tried to take her own life. So leaders, if you're aware of these indicators, you can intervene, stop. Same thing with on the peer side, or a friend, a battle buddy. If you see this in your friend, like have the courage to ask them, like, hey, why are you giving your truck away? That's your pride and joy. Why did you give the keys? Oh, because I'm just trading in it. Well, you know what? I'm in a rough spot. I just got divorced. I missed a lot of work, and so now I'm gonna get counseled. Like, whoa, you should be aware. Like, these are triggers, and so if we're aware of these triggers, if we're educated about these triggers, we can intervene.
Is there anything that civilians can do?
I think civilians can do the same things for former military members that they do for another civilian on the street. If we can choose to be a little empathetic, if we see somebody having a bad moment, if we cannot judge somebody so harshly, if we can choose to listen. But I'd hope that we wouldn't narrow that just to military members. Military members do sacrifice quite a bit. So do members of American society. So I think if we generally just try to treat people well, be willing to listen, not judge as harsh, that can probably reduce the stigmas associated with getting help. If we treat military members that way in the community, maybe they'll feel more integrated into that community. Maybe that's their sense of belonging, that's their purpose, especially after wearing the uniform.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that there are enough resources, if any, that are there for service members on the civilian side that can be reached out to?
I know there are resources available. I don't know if there are enough. I will tell you there are a lot. And early in my career, after deployments or whatever it was, maybe a little bit of a calm down period where you talk through some things. But my predecessors were just like released, right, without maybe having a check, talking to a chaplain, talking to behavioral health, just to check on their well-being. And so that got better my first deployment. It got better in subsequent deployments. And then even my annual health assessment. I feel like the Army is trying to be a little more direct with service members and asking those questions. There's not like a human factor, it's just a questionnaire. So it's on the service member to answer accurately and ask for help. And in the community, I just think that there are these anonymous resources. They may be resourced with federal money, but military one source or that helpline, it's not going to be a military member on the other end. It's probably more likely going to be somebody in our nation, if we're using the text, but if we're using military one source, it's probably going to be somebody that is in my community. I will go, I live in the Omaha area, so if I were to use that military one source, I'm really confident that I would go see a provider in my community. And if I don't have this experience, but I expect that there are measures in place that if I'm uncomfortable going to see a provider in my community, hey, can you link me up with a provider in Council Bluffs or Lincoln, Nebraska? So I feel like those resources are there.
Do you think, on the flip side, that the Army is providing enough resources on their end? And to go even farther into that, are they making sure people are aware of the provided resources?
I think the Army, I gave an example of like deployments and how there were more resources as the years went by. The Army's also adopted this piece of holistic health and fitness. And so it's not just my physical fitness, right? There are these pillars of personal readiness: emotional, spiritual, social. Physical is one of them as well. And so if I go to these holistic health and fitness facilities, some units, they have a dedicated facility, so there's more access. And still other units, I think I've heard of it more on like the special operations side, is they actually have these resources in the same building. So if you're interested in avoiding a stigma, right, you can look like the tough soldier, go park your vehicle in the parking lot, grab your gym bag, because that is also a fitness center where they're going to have strength and conditioning coaches. And if that's the perception that you want people to see, you can go in there and maybe just take a right and you go talk to a behavioral health provider or a mental health provider. So try to, there's a soldier's vehicle in the parking lot at the behavioral health clinic. Maybe somebody wants to, my vehicle can't be seen there. But if I consolidate all those resources in one facility, and then how was your gym workout? Oh, it was great. That person didn't know that, I just took a right and I went and talked with a counselor. So I think the Army is providing access to resources. I mentioned these studies about, really trying to understand the triggers for why soldiers harm themselves. That was a unit's example. I wasn't in that unit, but with technology, I learned about that from a podcast. And so I think the Army is finding additional ways to reach soldiers and inform leaders to keep us aware. And then even in our education, part of my job in my current position is to educate. So I get to teach future leaders of character. I'm talking about this issue with college students who are going to be officers. So I think feels like growing opportunities that the Army is providing to provide resources, make leaders aware of their role. So I feel like the Army is doing a far better job. I don't have a specific recommendation on what the Army can do so much better. So I feel like there are more methods to overcome the barriers that prevent folks from seeking help.
What can family and friends do to help reassimilate a soldier coming back?
So before reassimilate, have maybe an appreciation of what that service member is going through. So you know that your neighbor is getting ready to deploy. Just appreciate that there's probably added stress on that family. Who's going to cut the grass? Who's going to shovel the snow? What's my backup plan to get kids from A to B? So just know that that's probably a higher stress period of time for that family. So if there are things to, fundamentally just be empathetic, maybe I shouldn't approach them about their dog was in my yard, right? Some small issue. Or, now's a good time to offer them to make them dinner or something like that. So just know that those can be stressful times. For reintegration, reassimilation, I think just giving folks a little bit of time to breathe. In some deployments, we own that environment. That is our battle space. We're the police, we do what we want, and it's not the Wild West, but we behave in a certain way because it enhances our survivability. So maybe we drive faster, maybe we drive up on the median. Our patience with those we interact with is far less because we don't have time for a long, drawn-out conversation. So if we can be mindful that could be the mindset, and we've got to get that as that service member reintegrates, they get to adapt to the way of life, the way things were before they deployed. Other things for service members and spouses. So I feel like the Army does a decent job of educating both service members and their significant others. But a significant other gets used to doing things by themselves or running the house a certain way. And if that service member comes back, all right, well, I'm going to do it. There's a reintegration period to figure out how we're going to parent kids, how we're going to do dishes, right? So just being mindful that those reintegration periods can be periods of a different level of stress, right? Not the stress of I better have my will complete. Am I going to survive this deployment? It's how am I going to adapt back into society? Some of it's real minor. You got to be very careful that what can be perceived as a minor issue for one can turn out to be like a significant issue for somebody else. So being understanding that things are different and giving things time to settle down. So I felt like the Army invested more on the backside of deployments later on. It was more deliberate, the reintegration process. So I think continuing that approach is useful, and then adapting. So I think the Army is a learning organization, and so it learned, some people who deployed before me, they would just get home, walk off the ramp of the aircraft, and they're home, right? And there are no restrictions. So I went from few restrictions to more deliberate reintegration. So continue to learn, continue to understand what stresses servicemen and women today, because stressors can change over time.
What does that continuous improvement look like from right now to into the future?
I think it has to be tailored to the level of mission that service member is away for. If we're talking World War II, where we could deploy and we come home when the mission's complete, there's potential for somebody to be away far along, and so it could take even more time to reintegrate. Conversely, if somehow deployments are condensed to, instead of a year or 9 months or 6 months, maybe somebody's deployed for 3 months, and maybe they need a different level of reintegration because they're home, they're gone, they're home, they're gone. That's different than being gone for a year. Also, the scale of the conflict. If it is large-scale combat operations where there are just an overwhelming number, like a higher volume of conflict, higher volume of casualties, I believe that will probably wear on a service member, and also wear on family members stateside who see messages delivered, are going to way more funerals. I think that will have a different impact, right, on service members and their families. So there's going to have to be a tailored approach to reintegration, because if I deployed but I never saw anybody get killed, or I'm a remotely piloted aircraft operator and I see, only an adversary get killed, there's no magic formula. There can be, if I have one service member that gets wounded or killed, that can have a catastrophic effect on me. If I see one adversary or one civilian killed or wounded, that can have a catastrophic effect. Or I can see that 500 of those, and I am resilient in such a way to where it doesn't affect me. But I guess my perceptions are that the more chaotic, the larger volume of casualties will have to drive a different approach to try to help servicemen and women reintegrate, enhance their resilience to be productive members in the military and after military service.
No pressure to, but if you have any experiences with suicide that you're willing to share, you're absolutely welcome to.
Now, I guess so I have had a couple soldiers that I served with try to take their life. It forced me to question, am I doing the right things as their leader? Could I have known that Sergeant Moore, he was new to the unit, he'd been there for a few months, what could I have done differently to try to take care of him? And was there something that I or the people I served with, is there something we could have done to try to prevent him from cutting his own wrists? So it makes you reflect. For the person who I had try to take their life years later, I'm the one that directed that, hey, she didn't perform honorably, she needs to come in, and we're gonna get to the bottom of this and counsel. So I directed that action. That service member chose to react to that direction and with drug overdose and probably alcohol poisoning and who knows what else. But it was my action that influenced their ability to take that approach. So it reminds me to be mindful of my approach, make sure that I'm clear, I'm level when I engage with servicemen and women. Hopefully I'm that way when I engage with people in my community, but being empathetic, even when somebody misses the mark, right, they don't perform honorably, still try to treat them with fundamental respect. I thought I did that, but again, those are my perceptions. Other things I think about for those who, I worked with a gentleman who took his own life, and you wouldn't expect it, right? This fella, married, 4 kiddos, you couldn't knock a smile off his face. Supremely talented, so that sucks. That really sucks. And so you reflect, was there a trigger that I should have known? Was there a warning sign that I should have known? And so my takeaway from that tragedy is just because somebody has a perception like all is well, maybe not everything is. So if you can try to be like a positively intrusive leader. I didn't supervise that person, but maybe I did task them. I definitely interacted with them a lot. Try to have like more meaningful relationships. So hopefully if there's a barrier of like, this is just a superficial conversation, I can't really tell them. They don't really want to know that I am struggling. So I'm just going to put on this facade of a nice, smile and pretend like everything's great. I think that's how it's kind of affected me. I try to use it as a resource to figure out how I can be better.
If you could address the American public about veteran suicide, what would you say?
The cliche that you've heard probably many times is if we're talking things like suicide, that is somebody taking a permanent action for a temporary challenge. So if somebody is struggling, if we can try to fight to have some perspective and realize that there is hope, there is a way out, there is somebody that wants you here, you are valuable. So try to have that perspective. If you can, find somebody you trust. You should be able to trust somebody. And if you can't trust somebody, well, trust that anonymous hotline and try to reach out for help. I'd rather somebody have a little bit of a stigma or be content with somebody snickering if somebody learns about the trials and tribulations that the person's going through, but at least they're alive to deal with it. Have hope, know that whatever you're going through is hopefully it is a temporary challenge. There is a way out. And the way out can be reaching out and trusting those you know, and if you don't, use an anonymous resource.
Been in the Army 17 years. I've served on every leadership position, team leader, squad leader, platoon sergeant, first sergeant, sat in the Ops Sergeant Major seat, worked both echelons of Force Com and TRADOC, and back here in TRADOC at USAC, working with the ROTC cadets at the University of Nebraska.
So to kind of put it simply, you've done a lot, you've been around. What sort of experiences have you had that have helped you in shaping how you lead and how you interact with soldiers?
I think it has to be on a personable level. So soldiers, they will always shy away from higher ranking leaders. There's a good difference between leadership and likership and then actually having compassion for a soldier and then being able to trust you. So I always took the approach is, yes, mission first, but family always or soldier always. So if someone needs help, I will drop my things to go help those soldiers, or just in the everyday passing, going to talk to them, seeing how their day's going. Especially this time of year around the holidays, it's good to see, hey, what's your plans? Do you have someone? Just communication. Don't always wear your rank on your chest as far as a senior leader goes, because there is someone out there that admires your leadership or looks up to you in more than just being a leader. They respect you as a person, so they're looking for that help sometimes, and just to talk to someone.
Not everyone thinks about the soft skills.
Yeah.
The being one-on-one with people.
Yeah, and I think that's what a lot of leaders lack is kind of those soft skills. Moving into like a different environment, like it was year after year we were deployed, so you had to have more of those hard skills. A lot of the times it was like, hey, you just need to keep things in the closet and be a hard charger. Now it's more of like, hey, we need to get to know people on a different level, because it goes a long way, not only in mission success, but it drives that home life, the mental aspect of everything too. Because if you just work all the time and stressed out all the time, it's no benefit to anybody, because you can't take care of someone else if you can't take care of yourself.
Because obviously you've been deployed, I would assume.
Yes.
How is it making that transition of being out there and then coming back?
It's definitely tough. I think out there you're close, so not like everybody gets to go home at night, right? So you're all on a compound. It's more of like a family bond that brings you together on deployments. You actually have to be closer with one another, because depending on the type of deployment, regardless of the type of deployment actually, is like you're away from home, so everybody is in the same struggle of being away from home. And on deployments, people see different things. So you have to be there regardless of rank. I think that's probably one of the biggest times is when you take off rank. You're a person with other people around you, because you have to be. You have to be able to trust the person to your left and to your right every single day. You're living with them, you're eating with them. It's a lot closer knit over there. And then when you come back home, right, everybody has a different aspect. Everybody has their own lives. People go back to their families, people go back to the barracks, and that first 30, 60, 90 days back home is rough for some people, because it's a transition. It's going from having everybody close living to you, then going back into the barracks. It's tough for people, because now they don't live with someone, or they may not be able to engage with someone every single day. The dependability that they feel may be gone a little bit. There is a transition, but I think that's where engaged leaders are very important, making sure those soldiers are taken care of, making sure that they know what they can and can't do when they return.
Do you think how that transition has an effect on a soldier's mental health?
Oh yeah, 100%, right? So like we were talking about, is like when you're deployed, you're together 24/7. Could be a year, could be 9 months, could be a year, could be 15 months in some people's cases early on, both conflicts, right? But it does, because you go from living and talking and breathing with someone every single day to not having anybody by you until you go to work. Kind of that downtime too will take a toll, because when you're deployed, you're constantly busy, whether you're preparing for mission, coming off of mission, you're kind of always doing something. Probably I would roughly say 18 to 20 hours of the day most days. Sometimes it's a little bit slower, and then you come back and you have what feels like free time, right? So you work from PT and then you get off work at 1700. A lot of times people don't know what to do with the downtime, and as bad as it may say, a lot of people in the military will resort to some type of abuse or some type of addiction, whether it be alcohol, nicotine, caffeine. That may not be morally acceptable in some people's lives, right? And gambling is another one. It's just a slippery slope, and leaders aren't engaged. More of those soldiers or more of those leaders kind of fall through the crack on that. Knowing your soldiers is a big thing to help prepare them when they come back for their mental state.
What do you think a leader can do to help their soldiers when they come back as well? What can they do when their soldiers come back?
Yeah, so there's when you come back from a deployment, a lot of organizations, and speaking from coming from their 1st Infantry Division, is very great on making sure that there is speakers to come in. And a lot of times, younger soldiers don't want to hear speakers, they just want to go home. But they provide resources. The Army has a substantial amount of resources. You have Military One Source, you have ACE, you have all these other resources that you could go talk to, behavioral health embedded into every brigade. For leaders and people that engage with soldiers coming home, it's like, seek the help if you need help. Don't shy away from it. Don't think that you're less or weaker because you need to seek out help. You can't help anyone if you're not helping yourself first. Get yourself some help, talk to someone, and then help the soldiers that may need. I think the briefs that we get coming back, like letting all the soldiers know what is available to them, because a lot of them don't know. And then just talking to them before you get off the plane, 72 hours before you get off the plane, just go and talk to individually each one of the soldiers and be like, hey, what's your plan on return? Because a lot of times you'll go and you'll have to do like reintegration, and then you'll get some sort of holiday leave, a week or two of leave. I think it's very important. That is the time to get to know your soldiers a lot more and in depth and see what their plan is. Again, this time of year as well, like before everyone breaks on holiday leave, it's like, what does your plan look like at the beginning of leave, and when do you plan on returning? Try to get into the finer details, not just, oh, I'm going home. But I think having a plan and talking to them and making sure, and actually listening. Talking is one thing, but actually listening to them and providing feedback from a leader's perspective on, oh, maybe you shouldn't do that, or maybe that's good, or hey, I've ran into this issue before. Maybe you could tackle it this way.
It really is that relationship.
It is, yeah. And if you as a leader can't build a relationship with a soldier, there's other soldiers out there. Like, it's almost like a third party connect, right? Like, there's other soldiers out there that have built that relationship, that may have built a relationship with you. So you kind of like third party ask them, is this soldier doing okay? Is this leader doing okay? How's their family life, or going on in their home that we may have to question, or maybe have concerns about what's going on? And not to be snoopy or nosy, but we got to care for one another. We're a big family. We show up to work, we have a saying, like one team, one fight. We gotta all be part of that. It's not like babysitting or anything, but that's where it comes. The compassionate side of a leader is like, hey, what is really going on?
I mean, to me, it just sounds like with going first, you set the example and then kind of stick by their side.
Yeah, I don't know, like sticking by their side, right? Because you don't want them to feel monitoring them. But I think just a casual conversation of like, hey, how's your day going? And you can gauge a lot off of someone by just asking them how their day's going. You see me every day and like, hey, Master and Barbara, how's your day going? And I'm upbeat 90% of the time. Great to be here. We get PT today. We do this. And then the next day you ask me, it's like, I've had better days. I wish I wasn't here right now, right? So those cues as a leader, just by engaging with all your soldiers and kind of knowing their demeanor, right? Because you could go up to a soldier and be like, hey, how's your day going? And you're like, oh, kind of sucks. But that soldier says that every day. You're like, oh, well, that's just normally him, Like, maybe we need to find a root cause, or maybe he's super excited about something, and you're like, oh, that's a normal change. Get into that. What are you so excited about? Normally they're down, and then they'll be ecstatic about something, and then you kind of know what their livelihood is, and you get to know them. Engage with everybody you see every day. A goal of mine when I started out as a young sergeant was like, try to impact one person a day, right? So you're not going to impact everybody in your sphere that you run into, but if you can impact one person a day, and that person can impact one person a day, then you kind of have the ripple effect where you throw a rock in the water and it creates thousands of ripples, right? So
is there something that people who don't have the military experience, is there anything that you think they could do?
From that side, I think it's just talking to someone, right? So let's say a veteran that gets out, right? There's hotlines out there that you can call. A lot of times you see people that they're caught up with different people that don't help them or people that bring them down. I would try to circle yourself with people with with success or with the same common goals as you, right? If you're in a group and you find that group is not doing anything better to help you, then I think you go find someone else. Because it's always someone gonna bring you down, and you really don't need that negativity. So it's like kind of get rid of them and find the positive things. Like a lot of people have gone through some hard times, and you know, you just gotta find your way out of it and go talk. I think the biggest thing for people is just talking. A lot of people have emotions built up in there. Talking to someone, I think would be the first step in the right direction for the civilian. Things that they're called MFLCs, they're military family life consultants that actually help with family and the transition back. And there's also programs like BOSS, it's Better Opportunity for Single Soldiers, where they take these soldiers on trips to get them out of the barracks. Like we talked about in the beginning, all these resources and programs, there are those that are kind of embedded into the Army, but aren't necessarily Army related. They may be Army funded, but it's like civilian driven to get soldiers to do other things. There's like adventure quests on most posts that will help go do civilian stuff as well.
So what's your experience around veteran suicide?
Yeah, so a lot of suicides that I've been near or part of is you don't see them coming, right? You're so close with these people that they just do regular things. They don't necessarily want to hurt you, they just want to end what is ever hurting them. At the end of the day, it does hurt you as the friend or whatever, but a lot of times you just don't see it coming. I've had multiple soldiers within the same squadron, same battalion commit suicide. There was no like indicator. And a lot of times as a senior leader going through some things is you can catch some indicators. That's when you need to seek help. Whether you go get a chaplain's assistant or go get a chaplain, go to the ER, whatever help you may do, that's when a senior enlisted has to intervene because you can see the sign. And a lot of the times it goes back to even if you feel like there's a sign there and you're not capable of handling it, that's why we have chaplains, that's why we have behavioral health professionals. And you know what, sometimes the soldiers hate it, but if you're exemplifying signs or risks to me that you're on the verge of suicide or something that you may put yourself or your family in harm's way, it is my duty to make sure that doesn't happen, to help get the provider, get you the help that you need. And I think any life lost is one too many. So there for a while, the Army had a very epidemic of like suicides over a string of years where it was high. And no one really found the root cause of it. I think for everybody, it's a little bit different. So I think that dialogue with your soldiers goes a long way because it could be alcohol, it could be family issues, it could be depression, it could be anxiety, it could be an array of those things. But if you just have that common conversation, I think you can close it down or get those people to talk a little bit. Everybody is part of the team. So if you do have a suicide or your organization has a suicide, it, regardless is if you were close to that soldier or knew that soldier on a personal level, it impacts your organization severely. Everybody is part of the team. You may not have known that soldier, but you knew or you lead 6 people that did know that soldier. So now they're affected. And once that do, as you a leader, you are now affected because you have troopers that are affected. And so, like I said, one life lost is one too many.
Now, you previously said that the Army has like a plethora of different services. Is there a service to help those with mental health issues?
Yeah, so there's plenty of services to get help. And I think what happens is soldiers and leaders, right? So when I say soldiers, I encompass all ranks. I feel like they see it as a weakness to seek help because then their peers or whatever will find out and be like, oh, this guy went to behavioral health, he's weak, he's not fit for duty, or whatever the case may be. That's not it. Like, you're not weak. I actually see people as kind of stronger to go seek help and figure out what the underlying condition is to help them, whether it be depression or alcoholism. Or I think sometimes it's the soldiers that are very strong-willed that don't want to get help, and then it's too late when they actually decide that like maybe I need help and it's just a little bit too far. But my advice would be like, you need to talk to someone or you need help or you're feeling like you're that lone person on the bridge, talk to someone. Go, whether it may be closed session, whatever your beliefs are, maybe go to church, whatever the case may be, maybe just be a random stranger that you just go talk to, right? And another thing on that is it gets very lonely at the top. So if you look at the Army rank structure, you have a ton of privates, and as you go higher in rank, the less people there are to depend on or talk to. Let's say we're in a squadron or battalion, there's really only one CSM and one battalion commander, and then there's 6 first sergeants, right? So who do the first sergeants rely on? They only rely on 6 other people. Whereas then you keep going down the tree, you have platoon sergeants that have like 16 other platoon sergeants and specialists and soldiers, right? So at the bottom, you have a big support group. It's as you go higher in the chain that your support group gets less and less. And those are the ones that I fear for the most because it can get lonely at the top. You don't really want to talk or display whatever's going on because people will deem you as weak when you're trying to lead a squadron or lead a troop formation. People are like, oh, this first sergeant goes to behavioral health. I don't know if I can follow him because he's weak or whatever the case may be, right? So people at the top need to seek help just as much as people on the bottom.
set the example, like figure yourself out before
Yeah.
they figure out other people. Would you say going to those programs, do you think it is possible for a leader to surround himself with even the lowest of soldiers, try and make the connection there too? Or do you think he can only stay within like the top other people who would understand his position?
Well, yeah. So the Army goes back to the rank structure thing, right? Like you don't want a CSM going to talk to a private, or a private going to talk to a CSM about like his issues, right? So it's kind of like close hold at that rank that you just kind of want to talk to your peers about what's going on. But I feel like, yeah, if it was like this may be a bad example, but let's say it's like Alcoholics Anonymous, and you have a ton of people showing up, and you're not allowed to say who's at the meeting, right? But there's a private there that sees a CSM there. He may be like, oh, it's okay for me to come here, because he sees other people doing it. Same goes back to the 1st Infantry Division down at Fort Riley, Kansas, where I just came from. So they have a thing that's called Operation Victory Wellness, where on your birth month you have to go do a wellness checkup, which you talk to a behavioral health specialist or some type of specialist, right? And so all ranks are required to do that on their birth month. So I think that is a step in the right direction to help show, as senior leaders at every echelon are also talking to someone, regardless if they need to or not, right? So it's a 45-minute session. You're going to be in there talking. Counselor is going to talk to you whether you want to talk or not. So I think it's a good initiative. Is it going to cure suicide? I don't think so. But is it a preventive way to help a way forward? Yeah, absolutely. I can't stress enough how much help there is, and maybe it's just lack of knowledge from the bottom to the top of help and resources. Maybe we need to frame it a little bit better about it, what resources are available. But I don't know. There's definitely resources there, and I think we're getting better. We're taking steps to help it. Again, you're never gonna hit like a ground zero with it, but we can get as close as possible.
How do you think transitioning back into the civilian world affects soldiers?
I think it's really tough for some and really easy for others, depending on the job that they go into. And what I mean by that is we kind of get like compartmentalized in the military. Like we're told, hey, you have PT at 6, you have to be to work at 8:39, you have lunch at this time, you're on a regimented schedule. And a lot of people that retire, we'll start with the retirees. The ones that retire, they're so regimented for the last 20 years to do X, Y, and Z every single day. And so when they don't have that kind of structure, I notice some of them struggle. Let's say you go get a different job at like a factory or something. It's like, oh, I don't have to get up early, but I can be to work at 8 and I can clock in or I can clock out. I really don't have to show up. I could just quit. There's just these different factors that factor into retirees. I think they also struggle a little bit too, because there's not very many jobs on the civilian side that are as close knit as you will find as the Army. Seeing the same people every day, interacting with them, being able to talk to them about different lives and actions that you're doing. Because if you don't like someone in the civilian sector, it's okay. You can kind of tell them that you don't like them and stay away from them. In the Army, it don't matter. If you're in the same squad or section, you don't like someone, you're going to figure out your differences real quick, because you're either going to have to live with them or be in the same vehicle with them for hours on end. The ones that just transition out, I would say like the mid-level leaders, I think it's a little bit easier for them. I don't think they've super compartmentalized. I don't think they're quite there yet, because they're still their mid-20s, early 30s. So I think the transition is a little bit easier for them. I think it's just that the tight-knit group that you get from the Army transitioning out to a different job is what sets it apart.
You absolutely don't have to, but if you have any personal stories that you'd like to share.
There was one that I was coming in. I wasn't there during the action, but I came in a week later after a soldier had committed suicide in one of the platoons I took over at Fort Hood, Texas. The platoon was like in shambles, and I didn't know why, and then finally found out that a soldier committed suicide a week prior, and it was actually during Thanksgiving break. So we're kind of coming up on the anniversary of it. It's 8 or 9 years ago that this had happened, and no one's seen any signs of it. They said he was the best soldier in the platoon, was the best Bradley driver, won Thanksgiving even. He just said that everything was too tough with his family. They deserved better. So there was no signs at work. It was super unfortunate. And just the way it impacted all the soldiers kind of impacted myself as well. And that's kind of when I was about shorter than midway through my career. That's kind of when the light bulb flicked for me. Suicide is a big deal, and it really means, and not that I didn't think it was a big deal before, but I had never been impacted the way I was impacted when I walked into that door to take over, which was my first platoon at the time. How it impacted the whole organization and how much that soldier was loved by everybody and just devastated. And that was very eye-opening for me. Started digging more into resources, what's available, how could we have prevented this? And a lot of the leaders there that I worked with after the fact, they said that we don't know how we could have prevented it, because this guy had no signs. Outstanding soldier, first to work, great at PT, last one to leave, always would do things that needed to be done at work, took care of his family, and it was just one of those things that we really don't know. And that's the really terrible thing about suicide, is you really don't know if they don't express to you to the thing there. And unfortunately, I'll share another one. It was 5 months later, we were deployed to Korea. We were on a rotation to Korea. Same battalion, same squadron, same thing. No signs of a soldier, and then committed suicide as well. And again, within 6 months, two in the same squadron, there was a lot to be questioned of what was happening behind the scenes, maybe with some leaders, maybe with some underground pressure, what was going on. And they were able to finally get some answers. I had transferred out of the organization, but I think they were able to get some answers. But again, nothing underlying that would have caused or questioned that soldier at that time. I think conversation, again, going back to just talking to someone and seeing like, hey, what's going on? Those are two that I'm comfortable sharing at this time.
And the last one, how serious do you think the Army takes this?
The Army takes suicide serious. I don't think senior leaders take the training and education of it serious. And what I mean by that is I feel like we always catch a suicide a step too late. And I think that has to do with education and training. By all means, the Army and leaders take it very seriously. It's the last thing that we want to see. And there is education and training out there, but I think sometimes we as senior leaders, and including myself, because I've been a part of it, is like we use it as a check the block, and it's the wrong answer. We say we educate soldiers, but we don't ask for like a rebrief or a back brief on, do you actually understand what is available to you? What are the signs and symptoms from your battle buddy? And not asking them to be medical professionals, but just kind of having them understand what are some signs. Because I feel like a lot of times we get happy with the click of slideshows, or we get happy with, okay, we did this, took us 30 minutes. Can we really understand the intricacies of suicide awareness and suicide prevention within 30 minutes? Probably not. And a lot of soldiers get bored with it, and I think that's why leaders take shortcuts. So I think moving away from suicide awareness and looking at the SHARP, which is sexual harassment and response prevention, the Army has done a great job to put in live action scenarios into buildings where you go in and they have like a bar set up that shows what could actually happen if a soldier gets roofied, in those interactive models. I think we need more of that with suicide prevention, like maybe setting up a uncomfortable place where a leader goes in and asks a soldier, hey, are you going to commit suicide? That's the hardest question, is asking someone straight to their face, are you thinking about committing suicide? Have you thought about it? Are you thinking about killing yourself? And those are the realistic training. And I feel like if we could get real live action role players where leaders have to go in and ask those questions, and then it just kind of like spirals out of control, like, yes, I am, or whatever the case may be, or have a leader walk in on a soldier dumping pills down their throat, or have a handgun, or something that simulates a more realistic environment, or give that environment to soldiers to train in. I think you get more bone-chilling reaction, and I think the seriousness would turn up a little bit on suicide prevention if you put someone in those awkward stages. That's just my take on it, though.